There is a moment just before the first light breaks through the horizon, a window of silence that most people sleep through without ever knowing what it means. The ancient world did not sleep through it. The desert mystics didn't. And according to texts that never made it into your Bible, neither did Jesus. What I'm about to share with you comes from a tradition that was systematically dismantled, not because it was wrong, but because it was dangerous to every structure built on the idea that human beings are helpless without an intermediary, that the divine is far away, and that the only way to reach it is through channels approved by institutions that have survived for centuries precisely by controlling access to the sacred. Jesus taught something specific, something that was passed quietly in the dark to those considered ready. It wasn't a prayer in the conventional sense. It wasn't a doctrine. It was a technique, a way of moving through reality while remaining unseen by forces that, according to the Gnostic tradition, have a very real interest in keeping your consciousness exactly where it is. And I want you to hold two questions through everything I'm about to say. The first, if this teaching existed, why was it buried? And the second, why does it matter specifically before the next dawn? Keep those questions close, because the answer is going to reshape what you understand about prayer, about consciousness, and about what is actually happening while you sleep. Most people think of early Christianity as a single, unified movement. It wasn't. In the first 2 and 3 centuries after Jesus walked this earth, there were dozens of distinct communities, each carrying different texts, different cosmologies, different practices. Some of these communities, and the ones history would eventually call Gnostic, from the Greek word gnosis, meaning direct inner knowledge, held a vision of the cosmos that the institutional church found deeply threatening. Their map of reality went something like this. The world you can see, touch, and suffer through is not the creation of the highest divine principle. It is the product of a secondary being, what they called the demiurge, a craftsman god who shaped matter but was himself blind to the true light that existed beyond him. And between that light and the human soul, there was a network of hierarchical intelligences, rulers, governors. In Greek, they called them Archons. The Archons weren't mythological demons in the cartoonish sense. They were conceived as structural forces, real intelligences governing the planetary spheres, the patterns of fate, the cycles that repeat in human life, birth, suffering, death, rebirth, the wheel turning and turning, and most souls never knowing why. Now here is something that was discovered in 1945, buried in a clay jar in the Egyptian desert near a town called Nag Hammadi. An entire library of Gnostic scriptures hidden from the systematic burning campaigns of the early institutional church. Among these texts was one called the Apocryphon of John, the secret book of John, and in it the Archons are described with extraordinary detail, their names, their functions, the spheres they inhabit, and crucially, how the soul encounters them. The text describes what happens when a soul passes through the realms after death. But it also suggests something else, that in certain states of altered consciousness, the soul can move through those same regions while still embodied, during deep sleep. During that threshold between sleep and waking. During prayer that reaches below the surface of thought. In those states, the soul becomes visible to forces that otherwise wouldn't register it. This wasn't fringe speculation. The church historian Origen, one of the most brilliant minds of early Christianity, wrote about the soul's journey through what he called the principalities and powers, the very same hierarchical entities Paul references in his letters. The Catholic mystic tradition, even after Gnosticism was declared heresy, preserved echoes of this understanding, the idea that prayer could go wrong, that there were regions you could enter without knowing how to navigate them. That consciousness in motion was not automatically protected. What the Nicene Council of 325 effectively did was collapse all of this complexity into a simplified theology of authority. The Emperor Constantine needed a unified religion for a unified empire. Nuance was not useful. Mystery was not useful. What was useful was obedience, confession, and a clergy that stood between the believer and God. The rest was declared heresy, and most of it was burned. But I don't want to stay in the abstract for long, because this isn't really about history, it's about you, right now. What's happening in your life right now? Have you ever prayed with everything you had and felt nothing come back? Not silence in the peaceful sense. Silence in the hollow sense, like a phone ringing in an empty house. You've said the words, you've meant them, and somehow they just stayed in the room.
Have you ever woken up at 3, maybe 3:30 in the morning, with a weight on your chest that wasn't physical? An atmosphere in the room that felt wrong. Not frightening in a way you could explain to someone, just present, dense, like something had been watching you while you were under. Have you ever noticed patterns in your life that refuse to break, no matter how much spiritual effort you apply? The same kind of relationship falling apart in the same way, the same feeling of worthlessness that resurfaces even after long periods of peace, the same door that seems locked no matter how many keys you try. The conventional religious answer is almost always the same: pray harder, have more faith, check your sin inventory. The problem is you.
The Gnostic tradition offered a very different framework. It said the problem might not be your faith at all. The problem might be that your prayers are not reaching the source, not because you're unworthy, but because there are layers between you and the true light that were never explained to you. And those layers have functions. They intercept, they redirect, they loop energy back into the system. That sensation of praying into a wall, they had a name for that. The sensation of being watched during the liminal hours before dawn, they had a map for that. The repeating pattern that seems almost mechanical in its precision. They described that as the Archons' functions, not malicious in the human sense, but systematic, like a filter running exactly as it was designed to run. And the question Jesus apparently addressed, in the tradition that was buried, was this: how do you move through that filter without triggering it? Let me give you 3 pieces of evidence. 3 fragments from different traditions that, when placed side by side, begin to outline something that looks like a deliberate map. The first comes from the Pistis Sophia, a Coptic Gnostic text that was likely written in the 3rd century, but carries material that may be much older. In it, Jesus speaks directly to his disciples about what he calls the counterfeit spirit, an entity attached to the human soul from birth that reports back to the archonic sphere. He says, and I want you to really hear this, that the counterfeit spirit does not sleep when the soul sleeps. It remains active, it transmits. And the passage goes on to say that there are specific conditions under which this transmission can be interrupted, conditions involving consciousness, breath, and what the text calls the light seal. Most scholars read this as metaphor, but the Gnostics were extraordinarily precise when they were being metaphorical and extraordinarily literal when describing technique. This reads like technique. The second fragment comes from an unexpected place, the Hecalot literature, Jewish mystical texts from roughly the same period, describing the ascent of the soul through heavenly palaces. In these texts, the mystic who attempts the ascent must pass through gates guarded by fearsome beings, and the mystic who proceeds without the proper passwords, the proper seals, the proper inner state, gets turned back, or worse. What the texts describe as the inner state required for safe passage is striking, a complete quieting of the emotional body, specifically the cessation of what they called the breath of agitation. The soul in motion, they said, must not leave a trace of vibration behind. It must move like water, flowing under ice, present but invisible. The third fragment is one that almost no one talks about, and it appears in a commentary on the Gospel of Philip, found at Nag Hammadi. The text speaks about the bridal chamber as a sacred interior space, not a physical room, but a state of consciousness.
And it says something that has always stayed with me. Those who have entered the bridal chamber will no longer be seized. The Archons cannot see what has entered the light. 3 different sources, 3 different traditions, all pointing toward the same possibility, that there is a mode of consciousness achievable through specific preparation that renders the soul effectively invisible to the forces that track and redirect it. And the specific window when this matters most, the hours before dawn, roughly between 3 and 5 in the morning, when the veil between the material and subtle worlds is at its thinnest, and when the soul is most active in its semi-conscious wandering. The Gnostics knew this, the Jewish mystics knew this, and apparently so did Jesus. So what exactly was the teaching? What did Jesus pass to those inner circle disciples in the quiet of the night? I want to be honest with you about what this is and what it isn't. It isn't a spell, it isn't a shortcut, it isn't a formula you recite once and then live like nothing changed. The Gnostic framework was always clear on this point. The tools only work in proportion to the consciousness behind them. A key in the hand of someone who doesn't know what door they're opening is just a piece of metal. What the teaching appears to be, reconstructed from the Pistis Sophia, the Gospel of Philip, and several smaller fragments, is a fourfold movement of consciousness.
Not 4 steps in sequence, but 4 simultaneous orientations that together create what the texts call the light seal. The first is the withdrawal of attention from the outer field. The Archons, according to the Gnostic maps, operate through attention. Where your awareness rests, they can track you. This isn't paranoia, it's physics of consciousness. The soul that is constantly broadcasting its emotional state, its fears, its desires outward, is a visible soul. The first movement is simply to call your attention home, not suppression, not denial, just a deliberate turning inward as if you are closing a door gently without slamming it. The second is what I would describe as breath as intention. Not the controlled breath of a yoga technique, something quieter than that. An awareness of the breath as a carrier wave. Every exhale in this practice is understood as releasing the energetic signature of the day, the residue of every interaction, every anxiety, every loop of thought that has been running. The Pistis Sophia describes this as releasing what it calls the dust of the outer darkness, letting it fall away with each breath until what remains is not empty, but clean. The third is what the Gospel of Philip calls entering the interior sanctuary. You can think of it as moving your sense of self inward, past the surface of thought, past emotion, into what feels like a still center. Some people experience this as a point of quiet light behind the chest. Some experience it as a kind of weightlessness. The text doesn't prescribe what it looks like, it only describes the quality, undivided, unobserved, resting in itself. And the fourth, and this is the part that was most dangerous for the institutional church, is the silent acknowledgement of the monad. Not a prayer directed upward to an external God who may or may not answer, a direct recognition of the highest source as something you are already a part of, not distant, not disapproving, already present, already holding you. The Gnostics described this as the soul recognizing its own origin, and in that recognition becoming, even briefly, transparent to everything below it. That transparency is the light seal. That is what cannot be seen. Think of it this way. A clear glass lets light pass through it. You can shine a beam at it and the light moves through without reflecting back to you. The soul that has entered this state, even partially, even imperfectly, is not broadcasting. It is not a surface that reflects. The archonic systems that depend on tracking energetic signatures simply have nothing to lock onto. And the reason this matters specifically in the hours before dawn is not mystical in an arbitrary sense. Those hours are when the brain is cycling between deep delta sleep and the first stirrings of waking awareness. The soul is genuinely partially outside its usual anchoring to the body. It's in motion. And motion without preparation is exposure. Jesus, according to the tradition that was buried, did not teach people to pray harder. He taught people to become invisible. I want to guide you through a practice now. Not something complicated, not something that requires years of preparation, just a direct experience of what I've been describing so that the words stop being conceptual and become something you actually feel. You can do this right now, wherever you are. If you're lying down, stay lying down. If you're sitting, let your hands rest open in your lap. Begin by taking 3 slow breaths, not forced, just intentional. On each exhale, I want you to imagine that the breath is carrying something out of your body, not a specific thing, just a general release. Whatever has accumulated today, whatever you've been carrying without choosing to carry it, let each exhale dissolve it. Now, without tensing anything, bring your awareness to a point slightly behind your sternum, behind the center of your chest. Not your heart in the physical sense, but that interior space just behind it. In many traditions, this is called the sacred cave, the inner chamber, the bridal chamber. Just rest your attention there. Don't try to feel anything specific, just stay. As thoughts arise, albeit and they will, don't fight them. Just notice them the way you notice sounds outside a window when you're inside. They exist, they're just not here. Let them pass without following them. Now, from that interior space, without words, without asking for anything, simply acknowledge that you are not alone in it, that the source from which your consciousness emerged is already present in that same point of stillness, not outside of you looking in, not above you judging from a distance, already here, already in that quiet. Rest in that for as long as feels natural. When you feel ready to return, and some of you might feel a warmth, a gentle pressure, a sudden stillness in the room, or simply a sense of having rested somewhere very deep, just let your breath bring you back. No rush, no drama. This is the beginning of the light seal. If you practice this specifically in the hour before dawn, setting an alarm, waking quietly, moving through this practice in the dark before the day begins, what the Gnostic texts describe is a gradual strengthening of what they call the interior fire. Each morning that you do this, the signal of your ordinary consciousness becomes quieter. The soul learns to rest in its origin. And the forces that depend on disturbance, on broadcast, on the readable signature of a scattered mind, they simply have less to work with. You may notice after a few weeks of this that the heaviness in the pre-dawn hours decreases, that the dreams around that threshold become clearer, less turbulent, that prayers, when you do offer them, feel as if they move through something instead of bouncing back. That is not magic. That is what Jesus apparently taught. We started with 2 questions. The first was, if this teaching existed, why was it buried? I think you already know the answer. A teaching that gives individuals direct access to the divine, that says the light seal is already inside you, that the highest source is already present in the interior chamber you can enter through breath and stillness. That teaching doesn't need a church, it doesn't need a priest as intermediary, it doesn't need institutional approval. And in a world where religious institutions were, above all, structures of power and obedience, that was simply too dangerous to leave in circulation. The burning of the Nag Hammadi texts was not an accident of history. It was a decision. The second question was, why does this matter specifically before the next dawn? Because there is a window opening and closing as we speak, not just cosmically but personally. Every night that passes in unconsciousness, in a soul that moves through those liminal hours, scattered visible broadcasting, is a night where the patterns continue, where the loops run their cycle undisturbed, where the energy that could be reclaimed is redirected. The dawn is coming. Before it does, you have a choice about who is watching you move through the dark. If your mind is still pulling on the threads we laid out, the Pistis Sophia, the light seal, the idea that Jesus taught something that was deliberately removed from history, then what I'm about to point you toward is the next piece of the investigation. There's a video linked in the description that goes deeper into the specific texts, the specific instructions that survived the burnings, and what they say about the archonic field in language that is almost uncomfortably precise. If this video raised more questions than it answered, that one was made for exactly that.